It started with a quiet buzz in the neighborhood talks of the HOA, dredging the lake behind the clubhouse to make it more attractive for the upcoming summer events. No one expected anything dramatic. After all, they had their own engineers. A few shiny plans on glossy paper, and the board seemed confident. But what the residents didn't know was that the HOA had skipped a crucial step: getting the proper city permits. They thought no one would notice. And maybe, just maybe, they believed nothing bad would happen. But nature doesn't play by HOA rules. At first, it looked like progress. Huge machines arrived. Water levels were lowered. Sediment was scooped out and dumped behind temporary barriers. But what should have been a careful, regulated process turned into a rushed, reckless excavation. And while the HOA board was busy patting themselves on the back and posting lake makeover updates on their website, quiet warnings were echoing from a few concerned voices, mostly ignored. One elderly resident, a retired civil engineer, even tried to speak at a meeting, urging them to pause the dredging and follow legal protocols. He was brushed off. "We've got this under control," they said. Then the rains came. Days of heavy storms pushed the lake past its limits. The soil, destabilized by the unpermitted dredging, couldn't hold. The barrier snapped. Water surged. In a direction no one expected, straight toward the HOA headquarters. Panic hit fast. Emergency calls were made. Sandbags flew. But it was too late. The once proud HOA office, where all those confident decisions had been made, was swallowed by the very lake they thought they could control. And in the middle of the chaos, residents were left wondering who gave them the right to ignore the rules. And who would be held responsible now that everything was underwater? The morning after the flood, the neighborhood woke up to sirens, ankle-deep water in driveways, and the eerie silence of disbelief. The HOA headquarters sat partially submerged, with papers, computers, and file boxes floating inside like forgotten debris. For a place that once held heated meetings, rigid rule enforcement, and bold lake renovation decisions, it now looked helpless, drowned by its own missteps. Residents gathered in small groups, whispering, "How did it come to this?" Most had no idea permits were even required for dredging. A few had trusted the board blindly. Others admitted they'd noticed red flags, lack of posted notices, vague meeting minutes, and how quickly the project had started after just one short vote. It all felt off, but no one wanted to challenge the authority too loudly. That's just how HOAs worked. You question too much, you get a violation letter. One man, Dave, a longtime resident with a quiet temper and a sharp eye, had kept a personal folder. Emails, photos, drone shots of the construction equipment. Even a voicemail from the city inspector saying no permits had been filed. He had tried to bring it up once during open forum, but was told it was not the time. Now, as he stood, staring at the flooded building, that folder suddenly felt like the most important thing in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, inside the damaged headquarters, the board scrambled. Phones were dead, laptops were soaked. But the real fear wasn't the water, it was the paper trail. If anyone went digging, they'd find missing forms, altered emails, and internal memos showing they'd known about the permit issue weeks before the dredging began. The cleanup was just starting, but the cover-up had already begun. And as rumors started spreading faster than the flood itself, one question kept surfacing: was this just incompetence, or something far more deliberate? By the second day, the HOA board released a short, carefully worded statement blaming the flood on unexpected weather conditions and outdated drainage infrastructure. But no one was buying it. The rain had been bad, but not record-breaking. People had seen worse storms in the past without lakes bursting their edges or HOA buildings turning into fish tanks. Whispers of mismanagement were growing louder, and the board's silence on the dredging permits only added fuel to the fire. Dave wasn't the only one digging deeper now. Karen, a single mom who lived near the lake trail, started comparing notes with her neighbor, Leo, who happened to be a freelance environmental consultant. Kay pointed out how the soil near the shore looked recently disturbed and unstable. The dredging hadn't just affected the water flow, it had compromised the entire slope. Worse, he said, it could have been prevented with basic geological assessments, something any permitted project would have required. Karen had lost power during the flood, and her son's bike was swept into the water. Now it wasn't just curiosity, it was personal. Meanwhile, inside the still damp HQ, tension between board members was spilling over. Diana, the treasurer, had warned them early on about the risks of pushing the project forward without paperwork. She even sent an internal email urging a delay. But now, that email had mysteriously vanished from the shared drive. She started suspecting someone had deleted it. The president, Tom, insisted everything was being handled, but his tone was shaky. Some board members were whispering about legal exposure. Insurance claims were being denied, and the city had sent an official notice asking for project documents. Residents began organizing. A community meeting was scheduled, but the board hadn't confirmed if they'd attend. Tensions were rising. People wanted answers. And beneath it all, the biggest question remained: what else had the HOA done that no one knew about yet? By the end of the week, the neighborhood was no longer just talking, they were organizing. Flyers started appearing on mailboxes with bold red letters. HOA, emergency meeting, we deserve the truth. A group of residents had even filed a public records request with the city. That's when the real cracks began to show. Emails started leaking, one in particular from 2 months before the dredging started, where Tom, the HOA president, clearly stated, "We'll move forward regardless. Permits will just slow us down." That one line spread through the community like wildfire. People weren't just angry now, they felt betrayed. They had paid dues, followed rules, trusted the board, and now they were facing property damage, insurance nightmares, and a lake that looked worse than before. Diana, the treasurer, quietly reached out to Dave with a flash drive. She didn't say much, just handed it over and told him, "Look at the folder marked confidential." What Dave found there stunned him: altered documents, backdated emails, even an unsigned city form someone had tried to fake. If this got out, it wouldn't just be HOA fines or angry residents. This could lead to real legal action. But just as the tension reached its peak, something unexpected happened. Late one night, a loud crash echoed through the neighborhood. The small utility shed near the lake where the dredging equipment had been stored had caught fire. By morning, it was gone. Nothing left but blackened metal and the smell of burnt wood. Fire officials said it looked suspicious. Dave immediately thought of the flash drive and hid it somewhere safe. He wasn't sure who had something to hide. But now it was clear someone didn't want the truth coming out. As the community meeting approached, everyone could feel it. The air was heavy with questions, and somewhere between anger, fear, and rising water levels, the truth was about to hit harder than the flood itself. The night before the emergency meeting, just when things felt like they couldn't get any more intense, a second twist rocked the neighborhood. An anonymous envelope showed up on several residents' porches. No return address. No note inside, just a stack of printed photos. Grainy but clear enough, they showed the HOA president, Tom, meeting with a contractor near the lake weeks before the project started. But that wasn't what shocked people, was what was in the background. A different property, a private lot on the far end of the lake that just so happened to be up for sale, and recently purchased. By Tom's brother, the speculation hit fast. Had the dredging been about beautification, or was it a cover to raise land value for a personal deal? The location of the flooding now seemed even more suspicious. The surge had damaged mostly community property and older homes on the lower end of the lake, but that lot on the far side, bone dry, untouched, perfect for development. Karen couldn't sleep. She started piecing together the timeline on her kitchen table, laying out city maps, emails, and property records. Every clue led back to one thing. The dredging wasn't just careless, it looked intentional. She called Leo, the environmental consultant, and told him to come over. Together, they spotted something in one of the documents Diana had, leaked a line item in the HOA expenses labeled Land Survey, Offsite, dated just a week before the project started. Meanwhile, Dave noticed something strange. The HOA's website had gone dark. Archived meeting minutes, budget reports, even board member bios were wiped clean overnight. It was as if someone was trying to erase their own trail, just as the community was about to demand answers. With the meeting only hours away and tensions boiling, one thing had become clear: the flood might have hit the homes, but a much bigger storm was about to hit the people who caused it. The night of the emergency meeting, the community hall was packed. Residents stood shoulder to shoulder, some holding wet paperwork, others scrolling through screenshots on their phones. The HOA board sat at the front, visibly tense. Tom, the president, looked worn out, but still tried to keep a calm face. Before he could even speak, Dave stepped forward, holding the flash drive. "Before we hear anything," he said, plugging it into the projector, "everyone needs to see this." The room went silent as the screen lit up. Emails, documents, and altered permit files scrolled by, each one worse than the last. Then came the photos from the anonymous envelope, Tom meeting with the contractor, and the land survey paid for. With HOA money, gasps echoed through the room. A few people shouted. Tom tried to speak, but no one was listening anymore. It was clear now, the flood wasn't just an accident. It was the result of deliberate decisions, hidden motives, and complete disregard for legal steps. The project hadn't just been unpermitted, it had been manipulated to benefit one family, at the cost of the entire neighborhood. Diana stepped forward next, with her voice shaking. She confessed how the board had been pressured to stay quiet and that some members were left in the dark until it was too late. She handed over a sealed envelope to a city official in the crowd. It was her resignation, a full written statement. The hall erupted, not in chaos, but in something colder. Disappointment, just when it felt like everything had come full circle. The twist hit. A quiet voice from the back said, "There's one more thing." It was Leo, holding up a small bag. Inside it, a lake water sample, one he had tested. The sediment dumped during the dredging. It wasn't just soil, there were chemical traces. Runoff from a restricted industrial site. The room froze. The damage wasn't just structural, it might have been toxic. As the weight of that truth sank in, it was no longer just about rule-breaking. It was about health, trust. And what happens when those in charge forget who they're supposed to protect? In the days that followed, the fallout was swift. The city launched an official investigation into the HOA's dredging project, and Tom stepped down under pressure, along with 2 other board members. The lot his brother purchased was flagged for review, and the community voted to freeze any development plans until the environmental tests were complete. The chemical traces Leo had found turned out to be remnants from a nearby abandoned site soil. The contractor had illegally transported and dumped into the lake to cut costs. That detail sparked a separate legal case, widening the scope of the damage far beyond what anyone had imagined. Karen and Dave were asked to join a temporary resident oversight committee while the HOA restructured. Diana, though shaken by the whole experience, began working with the city to help other neighborhoods avoid the same kind of oversight failures. The once fractured community started to rebuild not just their properties, but trust. People who had never spoken to each other before were now sharing updates, forming cleanup groups, and showing up to meetings with purpose. The lake remained off-limits for now, surrounded by fencing and warning signs. But it had become a powerful symbol of what happens when rules are ignored. and of how communities can come together in the aftermath. Neighbors had learned a lot. Not just about permits or runoff or flood damage, but about watching closely, asking hard questions, and standing up even when it's uncomfortable. The story of the HOA flood wasn't just about one bad decision. It was about how easily silence and shortcuts can drown a community. But in the end, it was also about resilience, accountability, and a hard lesson learned on the muddy banks of a lake that should have been left alone.